Israel retaliates against Iran. Iran gets engaged. Syria and Lebanon start being an much more active front. It's active now, but much more active.
There are many things taking place in this world. Some people say too many things, and people can't keep up. So this study, which will be my testimony part 3, which will be my final testimony, will be giving you an insight into what is taking place in this world. It will be divided into 2 parts. The first part will be looking at current affairs, but the second part will be my own personal testimony on my journey. And as I encourage you at all times, please research every single thing you see in this study. The first known recorded great human migration took place in a part of the earth that is surrounded by a number of different seas and has been described as the first land bridge and meeting point for ancient travelers. That was also once the most conquered and inhabitant significant region in antiquity, Asia Minor. It must have been both adventurous, nervous, sometimes treacherous, and very exciting when early man, once all pastoral nomads, and their small families before they settled, multiplied, and were carefully organized into huge expanding societies, explored vast terrains in different continents and islands to look for new places to inhabit and live, where the air was a lot more cleaner. And they would encounter wild animals, walked past vast rivers, streams, deep lakes, and trekked through ravines and huge forests overshadowed with a canopy of trees. And they walked over into huge mountainous ranges before a number of these geographical spots over time became covered in miles and layers of thick ice and sand that would form into huge, now scarcely inhabited deserts. They all had an oral tradition, but occasionally they would carve into stone and keep the memory alive of man's early history of the fall. And even it was explained in a different way to each culture. And what was not preserved in memory, stone, or in books, you can still visualize a record of Earth's early history with the naked eye by looking into the sky at polarized light after a rainfall, at that beautiful optical phenomenon, a spectrum of colors, a multicolor circular arc that can only be seen and only appears when water droplets in the atmosphere reflect sunlight, a sign of an early promise that will never be broken. Though man was trained to be a scientific zoologist at the beginning of time, his successors must have been in awe at the different colors, shapes, smells, and designs of different species that could crawl, run, climb, fly, glide, and swim. And even if he braved the ocean floor, he would have seen creatures that to this very day has men who are fascinated with the natural world in awe. For even to this very day, even if he wants to entertain himself, he still mimics the very creatures that he was ordained to study and name. But exploration and discovery of the animal kingdom was not the only thing he explored. He learned mineralogy and petrology by studying igneous, metamorphic, and sedimentary rocks and their properties. And for many millennia, man has produced some great feats of engineering. Many of these artifacts from early man and his successors are carved so precise into stone, from objects you can hold into your hand to architecture that is so mathematically sophisticated that modern man in his ignorance struggles to fit it into his unscientific evolutionary timetable, because it does not align and match up with his warped theories of his so-called primeval past. But honest modern skilled engineers in big corporations confirm the research of Sir Austin Henry Layard and William Goland admit that over time man has not changed at all, but uses the same materials in the earth to accomplish the same goals.
Copper has been alongside mankind forever. It heats up quickly and cools down quickly.
Le cuivre fait partie intégrante de notre journalier. Il est utilisé dans beaucoup de domaines.
Copper is a natural component of anything that has to do with electricity.
en nuestras viviendas, en los artefactos, en nuestros smartphones, en nuestras computadoras, en nuestras tablets. Tenemos presencia de cobre en todo lo que vemos.
Existe un elemento, no existe otro material que pueda generar su reemplazo en los usos que tiene hoy.
Copper has been with us for 11 millennia. The humble beginnings were ores found literally lying on the ground and hammered by people at the time into small shapes that could be used for cooking, ornaments, pendants.
The metallurgy hasn't changed. The scale has changed, of course.
From the ancient times, hammering of sheets to today's wrapping of copper coils around wind turbines. There's no shortage of reinvention of uses for copper.
Copper is the single best conductor of electricity known to physics as well as the periodic table. So if we're going to electrify the world and decarbonize that way, we absolutely need copper to do it.
From the voices of credible men in both the mining sector and within the banking community, metallurgy, particularly the use of copper, has been in constant use from prehistory in antiquity right up to this very day. For men have studied its distinct value and properties, and peer-reviewed studies have confirmed that it was in use all over the world. It was in use among the early native North Americans, described as one of the world's first coppersmiths. It was found in an axe, one of the contents that was found among an early European who has been named Otzi, who was discovered in the Alpine mountains. The ancient Egyptians of North Africa, who were probably the only people on the face of the earth to experiment with nearly every single mineral they discovered, also used copper as a valuable metal in their kingdom. And in the ancient Near East in Mesopotamia, the descendants of Shem who occupied that geographical terrain in Asia also used copper within their society. This beautifully detailed carved head from Iran is probably of a ruler or of a noble that is dated to around 2300 BC. It is made from copper, and it shows the technological brilliance and sophisticated craftsmanship of early man, where it is among one of the earliest examples of hollow casting in the lost wax method. And to this very day, copper is still in use, where it is in use in practically everything we do, and is now turning into the most on-demand product on the face of the earth, for digital devices are now becoming dependent upon it. So we are learning that man has never been evolving, but he is the exact same creature, even using the same textiles from the same materials, like the leather clothing from this 14th century BC Sudanese Nubian named Myherpi, to the European-looking mummies discovered in China, dated to around 1800 BC, who have been labeled the Tyrian mummies. Man has been able to stitch clothing brilliantly from antiquity to this very day. And though he doesn't want to admit it, man has always been the same creature, because they all come from the same common ancestor. And even if their hair texture, their eye colors, lips and nose shapes differs, he is still the same. A member of the faculty of the University of Southern California conducted a mathematical study by tracing the genome of each ethnic group's ancestors, and guess what conclusion they came to? When they trace all of our lineage, they confirm that we are all related, just one big family. This may seem like a scientific breakthrough, but it is old news. In a book published in 1857 titled 22 Years a Slave and 40 Years a Freeman, this 19th century US abolitionist Austin Stewart said, quote, "Does not the Bible inform us that God hath created of one blood of all nations of the earth? Hence I come to the conclusion that God created all men equal and placed them upon this earth to do good and to do what? Benefit each other. All nations are alike intelligent, enterprising and industrious." So when man migrated from Ararat in Asia Minor to repopulate the entire earth, up to this very day, man is still exactly the same creature, using the exact same materials and tools. It only differs in his outside appearance. But while men are going about their everyday lives ignorant of the slow, subtle workings behind the scenes that has been ongoing for years. He is unaware that there is a drive to mold all characters alike and to take away many cherished liberties, and there are a number of institutions that are think tanks, religions, banks, and different organizations who are all working together under the disguise of humanitarian efforts to ever so cleverly subjugate the whole of mankind on the global chessboard, where one system will eventually come out on top as the winner.
Prospera is building the fastest growing private city project in the world, elevating human potential through a radically decentralized private governance framework. Prospera partners with global leaders in architecture and urban development to build new cities on this platform, creating transformative investment opportunities. Our platform is currently powering the next generation Prospera city on the island of Roatan in Honduras, as well as an emerging prosperity hub on the Honduran mainland, with more locations planned worldwide.
The financial services industry is rapidly transforming with the advance of new digital and cloud technologies such as data analytics and AI. Banks are using cloud technologies to provide better customer service, reduce risk, and increase employee collaboration. That's why we are thrilled to announce Google Cloud's strategic partnership with Deutsche Bank. Working together, we'll be solving key challenges for customers and the industry at large.
We always said last year in the restructuring of Deutsche Bank that technology is a key part of the way ahead of Deutsche Bank, next to the focus on clients, next obviously on focus on people and leadership. But technology will define the future of banking.
Bill, I'm going to begin with you. You've recruited Larry here and several other top multinational CEOs as anchor partners for your effort to develop critical clean energy technologies. Let's start with this. What is Breakthrough Energy Catalyst, and what will it do with the money these partners are providing you?
It's very exciting that we've got 7 founding partners here for Catalyst.
History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected. In times of crisis, the role of governments is more important and more relevant than ever. What is also needed is a summit like this one to go beyond crisis management and to look into constructive ways we can build our common future.
The COVID-19 pandemic is bringing great fear and grief at this time of change and challenge because of the coronavirus. This crisis will have a huge impact on how we carry out the mission of the Society of Jesus and in the Church. The Society of Jesus has done so many things since about more than 400 years. And in each situation, Jesuits have been able to create the way of being in that situation. It's not an accident, the COVID-19. It's the fruit of a way of how human beings has understand and have made their own relationship. And it's a confirmation of our mission to collaborate, to contribute in the change of this world.
So we have heard the voices of those who are going to capitalize on the aftermath of the global lockdown to merge all governments together. And big tech and the banking world want to integrate the world more into a digital space. But there's also another body that is playing a very central role: Big Pharma. She has an immense influence on public health, and she has been able to buy politicians in both the United States and in the United Kingdom, where she not only influences their state policy, but she also puts immense pressure on states who do not comply to her program. And how much did these corporations make during the 2 years of the lockdown? Well, according to Reuters News, they raked in or earned an estimated $100 billion from COVID vaccines and treatments. But they are also doing something else that will have bigger ramifications for those who do not conform to the dominant narrative.
Imagine if a simple eye scan could help protect millions of people against deadly infectious diseases. The innovation could also transform other immunisation campaigns. Rwanda already plans to use iris scanning technology to record which babies have received a measles rubella vaccine. Millions of people around the world live in conflict zones, fragile settings, or in countries that don't yet have effective record-keeping systems. Complete medical records for these people often don't exist, meaning they miss out on vital vaccines. Around 19 million children each year don't receive the childhood vaccinations they need. Eye scans could track who requires vaccines and text reminders sent to ensure people receive their required doses. This will help drive up immunisation coverage around the world. Innovations like this will help us save more lives. Let's get behind the future of vaccines.
What's your message to platforms like Facebook?
They're killing people. I mean, it really, look, the only pandemic we have is among the unvaccinated. And they're killing people.
This teacher says he's willing to die rather than get vaccinated. Shamgar Connors has stage 5 kidney disease. He's on dialysis for 12 hours a day. The University of Virginia hospital system is telling him no vaccine, no transplant. He recorded a conversation with his doctor.
I'd rather die of kidney failure than get the vaccine.
I just wanted to make it very clear that, ultimately, if that's the hard choice that has to be made, I'm never getting this vaccine, ever. I don't care what they say, what anyone says. I'm not doing it.
Even if it means you could die.
I'm fighting this battle not just for myself, but for everyone, even the people that disagree with me, because what they don't understand is that today it's me, tomorrow it's you.
Hospitals across America are insisting that transplant patients get vaccinated before surgery, and they mean business.
No COVID vaccine, no heart transplant. That's the ultimatum facing a young dad today. DJ Ferguson's heart is failing fast. Ferguson was at the top of the transplant list at world-renowned Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. But when they found out he's not vaxxed against COVID, they took him off the list.
A number of hospitals around the country are denying organ transplants to people who are not vaccinated against COVID-19 or bumping them down on waiting lists. This raises some ethical questions over the decisions. In one highly publicized case, a Colorado health system denied a woman a kidney transplant. The patient refuses to get a COVID shot. The patient refused, rather, is what it should say, to get a COVID shot because of her religious beliefs.
Karen Roses is a patient care technician at a New York hospital. Rob Erbst, a married father of 3 boys, spent 17 years at a New York City high school as a phys ed teacher. Raquel Martinez is a pediatric occupational therapist. They all reached the same conclusion about vaccine mandates. Why did you decide to put your livelihood on the line?
I felt like I didn't have much of a choice in the matter, that I was being forced to do something, to put something into my body.
I felt that what they were doing, what they have done, is they've basically held for ransom your health insurance, your benefits, your livelihood, your career in some cases.
The United States Department of Defense published the Emergency Supplemental Appropriations to address hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico and the Pandemic Influenza Act 2006, where it documents how to prepare for a pandemic. So they do have everything in place. And the United Nations in September 2023 published a similar report on pandemic, prevention, preparedness and response, where it calls to action, and highlighted in blue, it says to strengthen international collaboration and coordination at the highest levels, with the determination to reduce inequities and increase fair, equitable and timely access to and strengthening of capacities for pandemic prevention, preparedness and response. To recognize the need to support developing countries in building expertise and in developing local and regional manufacturing capacities for tools, including by building on efforts under COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access, abbreviation COVAX, facility, with a view to developing improved global, regional and local manufacturing, handling and distribution capacities, while further enabling the increased use of health technologies and the digital transformation on health systems. For those who may be unaware of that phrase or buzzword, digital transformation in the context of what has been said previously, especially by the CEO of Google. To summarize, it is basically the integration of digital technology by different companies so they can put all of your health details onto a global database so governments can have easy access to it, so they will know if you are vaccinated or not. And when the 46th Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America unfairly and falsely accuses unvaccinated people of causing the spread of the pandemic with a virus that killed roughly 5 million people, which is around 0.71% of the world's population, and where people in the United States are even being denied a right to live, being blacklisted and moved to the bottom of a waiting list, and are being laid off work, denied benefits and health insurance, who do not get vaccinated within the United States. This is definitely a microcosm and a trial run for something a lot bigger, where no man will eventually be able to buy or sell. But why have people in power become so bold in their undertakings? The secular-controlled, Darwinian-minded scientific community believe that we are all a product of natural selection, which I call natural deception. And when you reject God, you are trained to believe that you can replace him and become a god and have the right over other people's lives and bodies, where the unethical experiments that have been given government approval is frightening, because most of us have no idea what they are doing in a lab behind closed doors. These men in white coats always come up with stupid concepts of man's early origins, attempting to trace it not to the hand of the creator, but to some weird looking creature. Then under close investigation, they always stubbornly admit that their theories are absolutely stupid, and he still does not learn that his ideas always comes to naught. And when men do produce studies that take us back to the creator, it is denied scientific approval and becomes redacted, though the evidence always proves what was recorded in the book of Genesis. Now, there is nothing more beautiful than continuing the cycle of life when creating families and keeping the cycle of life going to preserve mankind and his legacy. If a woman ever decides to have children, when something is growing inside of her, developing each day in a 9-month cycle, when she sees that baby moving inside of her with the modern technologies of ultrascan, she is over the moon. But we are sadly living in a time where man wants to deny these opportunities, and these are the measures modern science, falsely so called, is taking to interfere with God's order of things.
A group of scientists from the US and UK teaming up to create what is being called the world's first synthetic human embryos made without eggs or sperm.
This looks a lot like a human embryo, but it was created without sperm, eggs, or a womb. It was made in a lab by a group of scientists in Israel, and what they've created so far offers a new glimpse into the early stages of embryonic development.
Scientists also believe that they can play the role of the creator, where they reshuffle the atoms in the atmosphere by harnessing and manipulating the environment in nature, then blaming the very nature that they have tampered with to ever so cleverly usher in what I call a green world order, the Gaia nature worship environmental agenda, where, like the unvaccinated, they are trying to make people feel guilty if they don't comply to their climate change laws. But Are all of these modern disasters a result of unnatural ecological changes in nature, or are many of the disasters man-made?
Apocalyptic images from Hawaii, where wildfires have killed at least 6 people in Maui County. Violent and explosive wildfires have torn through the island of Maui, destroying homes and businesses. The fires being fueled by a hurricane 800 miles away.
Fast-moving wildfires are raging across the West this weekend. One person is dead near Spokane, Washington, which is under an emergency declaration. Hundreds of structures have been destroyed. And in Canada, all of British Columbia is under a state of emergency. Hundreds of fires are burning across the province, and around 30,000 people are ordered to flee.
The record number of fires burning across Brazil's Amazon rainforest has prompted renewed global outcry over climate change. And big spending. $5 million from Leonardo DiCaprio, £10 million from the UK.
Now, it comes as Canada is experiencing its worst fire season on record. About 25 million acres have burned so far this year.
In terms of those wildfires, seeing a lot of that activity really beginning to tick back into the region. We've got 51 active fires. Of those 51, 30 of them are brand new and have occurred within the last 24 hours.
Now, 18 people presumed to have been migrants have been killed in a forest fire in Greece, according to local authorities.
Forest fires are getting worse around the globe, burning nearly twice as much tree cover today versus 20 years ago.
Though we do not deny the power of nature, many people did find it very strange that fires were taking place all over the world at one time at such a rapid rate. And on close examination, the fires that spread in California was deliberately started, according to the Associated Press. The uncontrolled Spanish wildfire was started deliberately, according to Reuters News. The wildfire ravaging Tenerife was started deliberately, according to the ABC News Australia. The firefighters on the Greek island of Rhodes said that the fire was an arson attack, according to London's Mirror newspaper, where dozens were arrested for those very fires in Greece, according to the New York Times. But as shown in a study on geoengineering, man is tampering with nature to also create a new climate law.
Controlling the weather is the ultimate superweapon. It's even more powerful than the atomic bomb.
Meanwhile, Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
Hanele Korhonen, a Finnish scientist, is tasked by the UAE to make it rain in the desert on demand. Ethical alarms are going off everywhere.
In China, they're waging war on the weather. A drought so severe, they're firing rockets into the sky to make it rain. The practice is known as cloud seeding. Drones and rockets are used to sow silver iodide into the clouds. The substance has a similar structure to ice and changes the cloud's structure to increase the chance of rain.
So neat to see. Chopper 7 caught this video of some brief snow showers that were very tiny in nature out across the west and northwest suburbs. Take another peek at it. You see this right here? That's the snow coming down from the clouds up here. And then with the wind blowing, it put this little curve in that footprint of the snow. So it really was a pretty sight from the chopper's perspective as it was flying on the western side of the city earlier this afternoon. This was right around 12:15. And I think what was going on here was we were getting some cloud seeding from the airplanes that are taking off from O'Hare.
Today, for the first time in human history, there is one mankind, not scattered civilizations in their own environments, with their own fate, but a vast mankind, humankind, which will have to decide all together where we want to go, where we may go.
In a book published in 1991 by the Club of Rome titled The First Global Revolution, co-written by Club of Rome's co-founder British chemist Alexander King, in order for you to clearly understand the modern climate hype, it says, quote, "In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we can come up with an idea that, and look at the words highlighted in green, pollution, water shortages, famine, and the like will fit the bill. In their totality and in their interactions, these phenomena do constitute a common threat, which, as Dr. Aurelio Pichi just said, demands the solidarity of all peoples." But why? The very first thing man was instructed to do at the beginning of time was to take care of nature by skillfully managing the environment to till the ground. But the Green World Order, something that has been in the pipeline for years, is an operation that is designed to make people feel guilty if they do not conform to the climate agenda, even though they openly admit that they are the ones tampering with nature. But many have not brought into it and are seeing that factual evidence is not being presented to the public with fake quotas and data. For the leading abusers of the world are those with the greatest monopoly on the earth. The United States has a huge military presence around the world, where it has 750 bases in at least 80 countries around the world, according to most recent data. And her military churns out more greenhouse gas emissions than entire countries. The banks are pouring in not millions, not even billions, but trillions of dollars to fossil fuel expansion in the global south. But the military and the bankers are strangely overlooked, and every now and then a respected scientist who is sick and tired of lying to the public will admit that the data coming out from the scientific community is not forthright and 100% truthful. And even journalists who occasionally can exercise free speech, restrained from corporate pressure, will admit that we are being coerced. And you will also occasionally get a politician who will also admit that this is designed to usher in a new world order, which may sound strange to the ears of many, but they are now openly admitting it. They are not even hiding the fact that the Green World Order is an operation, and what will be the results of those who do not comply? Well, according to the Telegraph newspaper of London, England, if you don't comply with the energy rules, you can face time in prison. That's how serious it is. Where even the head of the World Bank had to resign under pressure because he did not cave in to the Green World Order. You know it's bad when those in some of the most financial prestigious positions are removed who do not play ball. But the bankers, as shown in my testimonies part 2, will be playing a central role to wrap things up with this world order. And the best scholars to school us on how they work are those who are skilled in the school of economics.
It is absolutely impossible to stabilize a banking system which has been built, it's been designed almost, in order to be unstable. These mega banks and the smaller banks which live parasitically on other mega banks are constructed on unsound foundations.
The banking community has a vast monopoly over the whole earth, where organizations like the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, creates policies and regulations for states to follow if they are trying to rebuild themselves out of poverty, with huge terms and conditions attached to it. And if a state does not comply to the economic rulebook, well, there are consequences. The objective of these financial bodies is to either keep nations in permanent debt or to at least keep humanity under control. And studies are always being published on how utterly disgusting these organizations are, where their overall objectives are to make more and more money in the capitalist system and drive more and more people into poverty and permanent debt. A number of corporations outside of the banking world within the mining community have been able to capitalize on this economic exploitation by a clever loophole that exploits a nation's minerals without the indigenous people receiving the benefits, where it lines the pockets of the rich. It was a law that was passed after the Second World War, unbeknownst to most people, when states were revolting from colonial rule, where corporations will not lose revenue and a financial loss in sales, where they can sue any nation state who poses a threat to their profits if people want to mine their own natural resources. That's crazy. Thankfully, these corporations have recently lost many of their cases. Good. But within the banking world, men like billionaire Jamie Dimon, the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan Chase, the largest bank in the United States and the world's largest bank by capitalization, and billionaire Larry Fink, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and the World Economic Forum, who is the founder and current CEO of BlackRock, the biggest asset manager in the world, have joined forces to rebuild a country that has been caught in the middle of a geopolitical tug of war, the Ukraine. These bankers have been described as proto-fascists who prey on the vulnerable, and these central banks will push economies into more and more recession. One woman documented these things years ago, the late reporter Penny Lerner, and she published it in a book in 1984 titled In Banks We Trust, and she was aware on how they worked. Stuffed with money after World War I, American bankers embarked on a lending spree, pushing loans on any who would take them. IMF programs are designed to brake an economy's growth, and it is therefore an open question whether the medicine administered in return for IMF loans will not kill the patient. Not only is the IMF's economic vision flawed, but it also fails to consider the political consequences of its acts. While its economic formulas are always the same, be the country in Latin America, Asia or Africa, the IMF treats each sick client separately, thus hastening contagion. Banks rely on each other for the majority of their short-term funds, so the problems of one bank can be transmitted to other banks through the interbank market. Bankers do what? Dominate the world stage. How? With international debt hanging like a sword of Damocles over world trade. So even the middle class around the world are even feeling the pinch of the aftermath of the post-COVID lockdown world, where they are also struggling to make ends meet financially. A community that once lived comfortably in their wealth are unaware that they are not exempt from the global world order. But though the financial world is playing its key role, there is one more thing that will assist in remolding the mindset by training it to comply without resistance.
It is a battle of perception. If you control what people believe, you control the world.
They're here. You still don't get it, do you, boy?
They have recruited the rich and the powerful.
They're running the whole show.
Wake up! They're all about you.
We have been lulled into a trance.
Listen to what I'm saying to you. We're in trouble. The whole world's sending some kind of signals out of TV sets.
I've got one that can see.
They Live is a 1988 film that blatantly tells us how the media works by advertising ideas to us daily via subliminal messages. Every time the central character would put on a pair of dark sunglasses, he would see what the clear messages that was being marketed to the public every day. It wasn't just for consumer interests, but to ever so cleverly condition a society and slowly mold people's characters over time into being one global community. And what has single-handedly been the most effective tool to re-educate people's world view? The most powerful medium to affect the thinking and the behavior of people, the late Mary Whitehouse said in 1977, is, guess what? The television. We are constantly being marketed to every day by being bombarded with imagery all the time. Most of us are unconscious of the messages that are being presented to us on a daily basis. And many of us are totally unaware while we are buying things we don't need and embrace ideas that we have little or no background of what its origins are or where it comes from. Why do we believe things that 5, 10, 20 or even 50 years ago we once found ridiculous, backwards, abhorrent, cruel, disgusting or evil? In the early part of the 20th century, an experiment was undertaken with dogs in Russia to measure their response to a specific sound at feeding time. The man behind this scientific procedure's name was Ivan Pavlov, and he realized that even when it wasn't feeding time, when a bell was rung, the dogs' mouths would salivate for food. And like animals, humans, when you force feed ideas to them by slowly conditioning them over time, the invisible government behind the tightly controlled corporate media can make people zealously embrace and defend ideas and concepts where the abnormal now becomes normal. One of the most powerful tools for this conditioning has historically been Hollywood. And to market and justify the US military bloodbaths around the world, the Pentagon decides which scripts are worth backing and which scripts they will not defend. And the recently retired liaison Phil Strubb was the man who decided which directors received military aid, hardware and extra military soldiers for free. This is all documented in a book titled Real Power by Matthew Alford. Most of these films were either supported by the US State Department or at least promotes their mission. So the operations that the US government are conducting around the world don't look as evil as they are, for whoever they colonize are depicted as evil, and most automatically side with the US State Department's position and are hoodwinked into believing that American foreign policy is a just war. Now, when we look at a conflict in the world, we should never choose sides, but listen to both arguments, whether you agree with them or not. And people sadly emotionally get sucked into a conflict without cross-referencing the information first. And the region in the Middle East that gets no peace always creates two global camps. Now, in the film called World War Z, it is very clear who Hollywood has conditioned us to believe who the enemy is by presenting them to us as bloodthirsty zombies that want to invade other people's territories. But what is more frightening are the Christians whose sermons sound strikingly similar and identical to the policy of the US State Department, where they misinterpret Bible prophecy and cannot see the bigger picture.
Israel wants peace. America wants peace.
There's never been an opportunity like this.
A true Muslim must never recognize Israel. Jerusalem will be the price for peace.
What was the European Commission President's response to this litany of war crimes and breaches of international law? She stood with the Israeli Prime Minister and offered him the EU's unqualified and unconditional support. She said, Israel can count on the EU. Taoiseach, last year when Russia targeted civilian infrastructure and cut off electricity supplies, Ursula von der Leyen called out their war crimes. When Israel acts similarly, she not only fails to utter a single word of criticism, she goes to the region to offer support for their war crimes in our name.
Israel retaliates against Iran. Iran gets engaged. Syria and Lebanon start being a much more active front. It's active now, but much more active. And then you've got a significant war going on. And then ask the question, what's going to happen with Ukraine at this point and Russia? What's going to happen with China? So this is why the big question for the markets and for the economy is whether you get escalation. If you look at the way we're trading right now, It is a somewhat higher risk of escalation, but not significant.
This man clearly understands that this is a theatre war, a conflict that if it escalates, it will bring in outside players in a very sensitive geopolitical conflict. And it is affecting the global financial markets that can increase the price of food and energy, aka oil and gas. Now, in a book titled The Grand Chessboard, the late Zbigniew Brzezinski said that this region is very strategic for American foreign interests. And this geopolitician said in 1997 that how America manages Eurasia is critical. This huge region, torn by volatile hatreds and surrounded by competing powerful neighbors, is likely to be a major battlefield both for wars among nation states and, more likely, for protracted ethnic and religious violence. By exploiting religious hostility to the American way of life and taking advantage of the Arab-Israeli conflict, Islamic fundamentalism could undermine several pro-Western Middle Eastern governments and eventually jeopardize American general interests, especially in the Persian Gulf. Now, throughout a good portion of the 21st century, our lives were flooded with either news reports, films, video games, or wanted posters with the idea that Islamic jihadi fundamentalism posed a potential threat to Western democracy. I personally never bought into any of it, for I look at the bigger picture. We became exposed to a place in the Caribbean on the island of Cuba called Guantanamo Bay, where Muslims were being rounded up around the world and taken to it without no trial by jury. This was part of an operation titled the Rendition Program, a ghastly, frightening operation that was created by the CIA, where it had a number of allies around the world to assist in this operation. It was estimated that around 54 countries reportedly participated in the CIA's rendition program, and those included Muslim Arab states who worked with the CIA to kidnap, torture and imprison their own Islamic brothers for the interests of the West. A shadow of things to come. Now, very few people want to question that it was both Britain and France who created the modern states in the Middle East, and that the United States is the one who sells billions of dollars of arms to these Gulf states. Now, Zbigniew Brzezinski failed to mention in his book that who creates, finance and trains these Islamic jihadis. This is very cleverly overlooked, for these Frankenstein creatures were covertly spawned by the Western intelligence community. The Muslim Brotherhood was officially classified as a terrorist organization in the year 2021. This is quite strange and very hypocritical, considering the fact that the Tony Blair Faith Foundation was closely associated with and had strong ties to the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, and the 44th US President Barack Obama was secretly backing the Muslim Brotherhood. Odd. This photo in the Oval Office in the White House in 1953 is the 34th US President Dwight D. Eisenhower in the center with Muslims, and second from right is Saeed Ramadan. Now, who is Saeed Ramadan? He was an Egyptian political activist and the leader of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, he was the son-in-law to Hassan al-Banna, the Egyptian school teacher and imam who actually founded the Muslim Brotherhood, whose logo is the two swords. But who did this pan-Islamic group covertly work with to weaken any secular or communist influence within the Islamic world? This may or may not shock you. In a book titled Devil's Game, How the United States Helped Unleash Fundamentalist Islam, this brilliant investigative writer who gets to the root cause documents and says that, quote, in Egypt in 1928, a young Islamic scholar named Hassan al-Banna founded the Muslim Brotherhood. Banner's Muslim Brotherhood was established with a grant from England's Suez Company, and over the next quarter century, British diplomats, the intelligence service MI6, and Cairo's Anglophilic King Farouk would use the Muslim Brotherhood as a cudgel against Egypt's communists and nationalists, and later against Gamal Abdel Nasser. Zbigniew Brzezinski has openly admitted that he created the Afghan Mujahideen resistance fighters during the Carter administration, and the 40th US President Ronald Reagan only continued the work of his predecessor. When you look at all of these photos, you can clearly see that the Muslim world, those they label and designate as Islamic terrorists, whether they be in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, in Kosovo, and in Bosnia, are nothing more than creations of the West. What is an Arab Mujahideen fighter with a big old ginger beard to imitate their prophet doing in Bosnia, in the Balkans, in Europe? And why is the 42nd US President Bill Clinton doing at a grave of a Mujahideen fighter in Bosnia whose tombstone is engraved in Arabic? Iran was interestingly given a red light by the United States to sell arms to Muslim fighters in Bosnia during the Balkan Wars, and intelligent observers were wary that it would create an Islamic state in Europe, where Bosnia has been called the cradle of modern jihadism according to the BBC. But these jihadists were used by the United States according to the London Guardian, where they even slaughtered their own people according to the London Independent for political reasons, then falsely blamed the Orthodox Christian Serbs. Now, if you carefully analyze all of these articles by the mainstream Western press, they openly tell you that the men who have been labeled as terrorists are fully supported by Western intelligence. So even if the corporate media sells you a narrative, they also tell you the truth. But sadly, most run with the popular narratives. How many Christian preachers are bold enough to tell you that Hamas was created by Israel? The media openly tells you. Now, they won't tell you because it will interfere with their false, unbiblical, misunderstood paramilitary interpretation of Bible prophecy. Now, the media will cleverly coerce you into the US State Department worldview. But only those who can see the bigger picture knows that when they are ready to target a group, they can sway the pendulum where the whole world's mindset can go against a community and make people believe a false narrative, a shadow of things to come. So how is the world being trained into this global paradigm? The social conditioning of Pavlov's method is constantly exposing the modern world to two things: violence and the occult. And when I look at trailers on Hulu, Amazon Prime, Netflix, Apple TV, and many other popular sites, you can see that the things witches and warlocks once did in secret is now becoming more open and blatant and more acceptable to the modern world. This is the classical conditioning. You're becoming desensitized to it, to the point that in the United Kingdom, a number of prominent unpopular universities are offering master's degrees in magic and the occult. While this may be shocking to some, it shouldn't be, for professed Christians are debating among themselves whether they should partake in Halloween or not. So an English or Northern European tradition that promotes death, the occult, skullheads, witches and warlocks is now a debate. This is why the occult is growing, because Christians are becoming very disconnected from God and shallow in their thinking. And the imports of the East, like yoga, is becoming very popular among little children, where they're being initiated and the adults are contorting their bodies like a cobra. Now, if you look at a lot of the popular forms of entertainment, it is being strongly marketed to the public, as well as car advertisements. But do people actually know what yoga is? Yoga is originally one of the 6 systems of Indian philosophy called Kundalini, the serpent power, when full salvation is achieved, according to the Encyclopedic Britannica. So this generation is slowly being initiated through classical conditioning into the serpent power, which is a false teaching in Genesis chapter 3 verses 4 and 5, where man still believes from Eden to this very day that he is a god, and the powers that be openly tell you that they are using the occult as a marketing tool to turn minds against their creator to the worship of man.
This company is at war with itself.
We were able to influence this consumer.
Imagine what we can do to the masses.
My fellow global citizens, look up. This is our enemy. Together, we will win this war. Are you sure you want to do this?
We are you. 30 years in the future. We are fighting a war. Our enemy is not human. And we are losing. In 11 months' time, all human beings in the future will be wiped from the face of the earth. Unless you help us. We need you. Our fathers, mothers, and grandparents. We need you to fight beside us if we stand a chance at winning this war.
This is a joke.
You are our last hope.
The birth of the Capsuleer. A sacred act. Immutable and profound. Mind and machine merged. Flesh fused with power beyond mortal limits. United with destiny. A ship and its heart. They are one. New Eden. An oasis of life in an uncharted void. New Eden is yours to shape.
The age of humanity being the superior intelligence of the planet is over.
I believe that robots should have rights, just like humans.
Westworld, the vacation of the future today. The robots look, act, talk, and even bleed just like humans do.
In the beginning, this place was pure creation. I have designed every inch of it. Every blade of grass. In here, we create life itself. Out of chaos.
Imagine you're completely immersed in the fantasy, one in which you could do whatever you wanted, consequence-free.
There's a force hidden in all of us. Only a select few, the fearless, will discover it, unleash it, and ignite a new realm of possibilities. Where legends are rewritten and new alliances are forged.
playing God.
We are gods. Always have been. Always will be.
Jesus of Nazareth.
You can't even buy power like that. I want to be like that in 10 years.
I want to be like that now.
Plans, he needs miracles.
I have a plan.
I can see! I can see!
God sent me to deliver his message. I am your new Messiah.
Why does man, to this very day, still takes his instructions from the serpent? And why has the promised seed of the woman been so misunderstood about his mission, who was to bruise thy head according to the prophetic language and counter the influence of the serpent? We shall find out in the next section of this study.
Now, when I was a teenager, I really wanted to know what separated Christ from everybody else. So I studied every single thing I could find. I would read books, secular books, religious books, political books, esoteric books, and guess what? This is my conclusion.
The overall objective of Bible prophecy is to divinely steer you in the right direction, so you don't lose your way on the narrow path to eternity. It was the first promise God gave to man after the fall to guide him through time, and there is a reason why we have to study the past to make sense of the present. In a book titled The Plenary Inspiration of the Holy Scriptures, the late Louis Gosson said, quote, "The history of the past ought to lead us to anticipate that of the future. There are in the Christian world but two schools or two religions, that which puts the Bible above everything and that which puts something above the Bible. The scriptures are composed of books, phrases, and words. Those words that fell miraculously on the lips that the Holy Ghost had chosen for such an office gave a psalm, sometimes a doctrine, sometimes a revelation. A prophet in the Bible is a man in whose mouth God puts his word which he wishes to be heard upon the earth. The prophets could reveal the past as well as the future. They denounced God's judgments, they interpreted his word, they sang his praises, they consoled his people, they exalted souls to holiness, they testified of Jesus Christ. In causing his books to be written by inspired men, God, who desired to make known to his elect in a book that was to last how long? Forever. The spiritual principles of divine philosophy has caused its pages to be written in the course of a period of 1600 years by priests, by kings, by warriors, by shepherds, by publicans, by fishermen, by scribes, by tent makers, associating their affections and their faculties therewith, more or less according as he deemed fit. Such then is God's book, its first line, its last line, all its teachings, understood or misunderstood, are by the same author, and that ought to suffice for us. Now, in another book titled The Papacy by the late Dr. James Aitken Wiley, stressing the importance of the past, he also said that the recovery of the world from the depth into which the fool has plunged it is both a slow and laborious process. Human nature is still unchanged. The doctrine of the fool must necessarily be a fundamental one in every system of theology. It formed the starting point in those meager systems which existed in the pagan world. But it is not enough that we give it a place in our scheme of truth. It must be rightly and fully understood, otherwise all will be wrong in our system of religion. Should we fall into the mistake of supposing that the injury sustained by a man when he fell was less than it really was, we will, in the same proportion, underrate the extent to which we must be dependent upon the atonement of Christ, and overestimate the extent to which he is able to help himself. God is to be worshipped with supreme veneration. To him and no one else is all the glory. our redemption is necessarily the counterpart of our loss. Our regeneration is likewise the necessary counterpart of our fall. When man migrated from Iraq to repopulate the earth, he definitely was not a primeval savage, but a highly sophisticated, skilled, intelligent being. He has not changed that much over thousands of years. He has learned to master the horse from antiquity to this very day throughout Afro-Eurasia, whether he be an Assyrian, a Greek, or an African in Benin in Nigeria. Before the modern photographic lens was introduced, he was also able to replicate his own image in a fine detailed form into metal, whether he was from the Near East in Asia in the Orient, in the Occident in Europe in the West, or in the global South on the continent of Africa. You could see that wherever he went into the world, mortal man, even to this very day, wanted or wants to be worshipped as a god in both life and in death. But as detailed and gifted as he was, it was his cultural beliefs that were quite strange. When I used to study religious education in primary school, there was something that stood out to me about non-Christian religions. The gods were so blessed ugly, deformed and frightening looking, and I could see that all the religions of the ancient pagan world were rooted in, guess what? Fear, and in the occult. They had wild-haired deities like this one, who were believed to help you to connect and to communicate with the spirit world, where shamans had an immense influence over their communities. In a museum in London, England, in the Wellcome Library, which is apparently now closed down, on display were or are artifacts from Afro-Eurasia, or items people once used that they believe protected them from evil. All the nations, no matter how sophisticated they were rooted in deep levels of superstition, where they held onto these amulets, charms, crosses or animals' teeth, and all different types of ornaments with the hope that it would ward off any evil that was coming to haunt them in the spirit world. But there was one belief that still holds every human being fearful. Buddhist monks in Nepal in Asia would wear the skull of the dead in a headdress, with the belief that death is a continuous process of reincarnation. In South America, they discovered many mummies in the Andes Mountains, and some tribes would behead their enemies, take out the skull, and tie the lips and mouth of their captives with the belief that the spirits of the dead didn't come back to haunt them. And in New Ireland in Papua New Guinea, they would make sculptures and shrines for the dead. For to this day, man still cannot get closure over death.
Deep nostalgia is sweeping the nation. Millions of Americans are submitting photos of their long-departed ancestors to a new app from MyHeritage and watch in awe as they come to life with smiles, eye movements, and head turns. It's reminding many of the Harry Potter movies when paintings come alive.
Password.
I've never seen a ghost myself, but they are real, right?
We are banishers. I want revenge on what killed me. I want to live.
Antia is a fictitious female warrior who was killed in this 2024 video game called Banishers: Ghosts of New Eden. But she comes back as a ghost and assists her partner, whose name is Red, in ghost hunting, where she wants to come back alive again and take revenge on the person who killed her. I would like to ask a question. What actually happens to a mortal person when he or she dies? For it is one of life's great mysteries. And in every pre-Christian pagan culture, there was this belief that when your breath leaves your nostrils, you do not really die, but you are continuing a journey into another life. Now, when Julius Caesar died, a comet appeared in the heavens, where they believed that he was now in the company of the gods. The Egyptian Book of the Dead taught that after death you would enter into the underworld and your life would be weighed according to your actions here on earth. In the ancient and modern world, men would wear masks with the idea that it would somehow reconnect them into the spirit world, and they would transform into a different being. Facial masks were worn by people in ancient Greece in Europe. They looked freaky. By no actors in Japan in Asia. In Canada, they believe that these ceremonial masks turned you into another being. And among the Igbo of Nigeria, a mask represented a spirit. And on the island of Vanuatu, in the South Pacific Ocean, they wore this headdress mask with the belief that it guards the spirit road to the ancestral world of the dead. They believe that the spirit of a recently deceased person must be able to complete certain ritual tasks and present the spirit of a sacrificed pig to be permitted to pass. And if they cannot do these things, a creature eats his spirit. Will they never achieve immortality? Weird. Every single culture around the world was deeply afraid of death and the afterlife. But there was one who came to dispel these fearful myths, so we can have a clear understanding of a subject that many find morbid: death. In the book of Hebrews chapter 2 verses 14 and 15 it reads, "For as much then as the children are partakers of flesh and blood, he," talking about Jesus Christ, "also himself likewise took part of the same, that through death he might destroy him that had the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver them who through fear of death were all of their entire lifetime subject to what? Bondage. They were psychologically enslaved by deep fear for the misunderstanding of the knowledge of death." Jesus gave us the clearest and most concise understanding of death, for he was the only person qualified to do so. And his words gave hope and clarity, not gloom nor fear. Jesus clearly tells us what happens at death. In John chapter 11 verses 11 to 14, when Lazarus died, Jesus described his death as a what? A sleep. So we are clear that death is like sleep. And in verses 23, 24 and 25, Lazarus' sister knew that the righteous saved will be brought back to life in the resurrection at the last day, where Jesus made it unequivocally clear that he is the resurrection and the life. And in verses 43 and 44, Jesus displayed a sneak preview of what he will do at his second coming, when he brought Lazarus back to life. Jesus described this event of bringing the righteous back to life in Luke chapter 14 verse 4 in the future as the resurrection of the just. In John chapter 12 verses 10 and 11, the chief priests wanted to murder Lazarus, for people believed on Jesus because of that display of God's power. And in Luke chapter 16 verses 19 to 31, in the parable of the rich man, Lazarus is used as a model of what happens with unbelief. For the parable is clear that the decisions you make in this life will determine where your eternal destiny lies. And Jesus said in the last verse, that is verse 31, "If they hear not Moses and the prophets," which is the Old Testament, "neither will be persuaded," when describing Lazarus, though one rose from the dead. In John chapter 5 verses 28 and 29, Jesus is very clear that everyone that has died are where? In the graves. And they will either rise and be brought back to life again in the resurrection of life, which is called the first resurrection, or the resurrection of damnation, known as the second death, in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 6. In 1 Kings chapter 2 and verse 10 and Acts chapter 13 and verse 36, the Bible is clear that the prophet and king, the patriarch David, is dead, which it describes as a sleep. And in Acts chapter 2 and verse 34, it is very clear that David is not in heaven. For David, like the saints before and after him, according to Hebrews chapter 11 verses 13, 32 and 35, died in faith and will be brought back to life at the first resurrection, the Bible is unequivocally clear. So what has made Jesus unique, misunderstood, loved, hated, and envied like no other? Well, there's one thing which singles him out above all others. It is prophecy. This recently discovered seal written in 8th century BC Hebrew has engraved on clay the name Yeshayahu, which means God or Jah saves. It is the name of the prophet Isaiah in its original Hebrew. And this 24-foot scroll written on 17 sheets of parchment is the oldest and best preserved copy of the book of Isaiah that was discovered in 1948 among the now infamous Dead Sea Scrolls. Now when you open the very first page of the New Testament, in Matthew chapter 1 verses 22 and 23, it quotes from this late 8th and early 7th century BC prophet in Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14 that Yahushua, or Jesus, whatever name you feel comfortable in calling the Lord, would be born miraculously of a virgin birth, to show who he was and where he fit into prophetic time. And in the last book in the Holy Scriptures, in the last chapter, in Revelation chapter 22 and verse 17, this prophetic book also quotes from Isaiah in chapter 55 and verse 1, making it alongside the Psalms the most quoted book in the New Testament. And what makes it even more authentic is that it is also a reliable historical document, and a man I stumbled across in the year 1997 proved it. He was born in France, raised in Italy, but most of his life was lived in London, England, where he also worked for the British government. He was well travelled, where he went through Central Europe, into Bulgaria, then into Dalmatia in Croatia, where he entered into Asia Minor in Turkey, then crossed into Jerusalem and Palestine. He saw the Dead Sea. He went through Syria, then into Jordan, where he longed to see the beautiful carvings into the rocks in Petra. He was in awe at the engineering skills of the large stone blocks in Lebanon. But his greatest contributions was when he entered into Iraq to excavate ancient Assyria, Babylonia, and he transferred into England an opening door into the ancient world. If you ever get an opportunity of coming to the British Museum in London, England, these human-headed bulls were transported from Iraq to England via this man, and it was he who rediscovered the oldest known magnifying glass currently on record that he excavated in Iraq, and he also reintroduced into the modern world King Nebuchadnezzar II, the Neo-Babylonian Chaldean king that helped to strengthen people's confidence in the prophetic book of Daniel. And this adventurous man was also an ardent art collector, and for his contributions of giving us a broad understanding of the world that we live in, he was given a knighthood by the second longest reigning British monarch, Queen Victoria. He was mentioned at the beginning of this study, and his name is Sir Austen Henry Layard, and he has been one of the very few people who gave me a clearer understanding of the past. Well-travelled, open-minded, balanced intellectuals with a biblical worldview are very hard to come by nowadays. But documenting his travels in his book titled Discoveries in the Ruins of Nineveh and Babylon in 1853, he showed us how authentic the book of Isaiah is, and this is what he said. The request made to me by the trustees of the British Museum, urged by public opinion, to undertake the superintendence of a second expedition into Assyria, had been universally received as fresh illustrations of both scripture and, guess what, Bible prophecy, as well as of ancient history, sacred and profane. He also mentions 4 different kings from 4 different kingdoms. The 25th dynasty of Ethiopians and Taharka, the the Egyptian king, Sennacherib, written almost identically as in the Hebrew version of the Bible, such as Hezekiah. There can be little doubt that the campaign against the cities of Palestine, nothing new here, recorded in the inscriptions of Sennacherib at Koyunjik is that described in the Old Testament. The events agree with considerable accuracy. Merodach Baladan had recently recovered Babylon. So as shown in a few previous studies, this is a bust of the Babylonian king Merodach Baladan, who is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 39 and verse 1. Sahaka, the African king on the left, is mentioned in Isaiah chapter 37 and verse 9. And Sennacherib, the Assyrian king on the right, is first mentioned in Isaiah chapter 36 and verse 1. And this clay seal in the center has the name of Hezekiah, king of Judah, who is first mentioned in Isaiah chapter 1 and verse 1. So 4 kings from 4 different kingdoms documented in one book. And if it can be relied upon as an accurate historical record, then it can be trusted as a prophetic record also. So in Luke chapter 3 verses 2, 3 and 4, the historian from eyewitness accounts when describing John the Baptist place in prophetic history quote from Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 3. After Jesus was baptized and started his ministry, in Luke chapter 4 verses 16 to 21, when he went into the temple on the Sabbath, he asked for the book of Isaiah, and he read from Isaiah chapter 61 verses 1 and 2, and openly told them that he was the fulfillment of that prophecy in verse 21. In Acts chapter 8 and verse 27 and 28 at Pentecost, what book was the Sudanese Ethiopian eunuch reading? And Philip explained to him that it was talking about Jesus Christ. It was the book of the prophet Isaiah. Now when we look at our world today and see what is taking place in both the geopolitical world and in the ecological world, you can see that people are puzzled and confused and are looking for answers and for clarity. But who can they turn to for reassurance? Now when I go through central London, there are people who are proclaiming the prophetic warnings, and they are doing a lot more than most Christians, but I personally don't want to shout at people and beat them up with a loudspeaker. It can drive them further away from God. But I still respect their efforts. In Matthew chapter 24 and verse 12 and 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 13, we are given a description of the spiritual condition of this world just prior to the second coming of Christ, where people will become a lot more heartless, where they become more and more numb to the sufferings of others. And 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 3 and 4 and Matthew chapter 24 verses 48 and 49 also prophesied that in both the church and in the world they will scoff and ridicule the second coming of Christ. But no matter what man does or says, the prophecies will still come to pass, for they have 2 overall objectives, and the Holy Scriptures explains. In Luke chapter 24 and verse 44 and John chapter 13 and verse 19, Jesus is very clear that all the Old Testament prophecies that were fulfilled in his day and the others that are meant to come to pass are all centered in him. And if he is not the center of any prophetic seminar or study you listen to, that interpretation is false. It has been shown in previous studies that in both the books of Daniel and Revelation, he has always been guiding his people. He is the one whose feet are like brass and whose eyes are like fire, and whose face is like lightning and is girded with gold. But while you go through these prophecies, it also has an overall objective. You should not be spending hours fighting, debating, and focusing on dates. But 2 Peter chapter 1 verses 19 and 20 says prophecy is not for any private interpretation, but its objective is that the day star, who is Jesus Christ according to Revelation chapter 22 and verse 16, should be shining out in our hearts. And 1 John chapter 3 verses 2 and 3 says that the hope of the prophecies, especially the second coming, should purify our hearts so we are pure just as Jesus is pure. And when people can see a deep peace when you are connected to God and your heart is transformed into the character of Christ, when you go out in faith and share a loving message to a very confused world, that little seed you planted will grow, for his word will not come back void. And though you may come across some resistance, when you preach the word in love and you arrive on that sea of glass, there will be people or individuals who you least expected to be there who will say to you, thank you. I would like to share with you some of the spiritual challenges that I have faced that hardened my character and drew me closer to Jesus Christ. When I was in college around 17 years old, I received a phone call from my friend, and she said, Adrian, I was invited to this church to attend a baptism, but I was in shock, for the music that they were playing in the church was exactly the same music that I would dance to in my clubs. And when I addressed them on it, they started to get very defensive. She sounded very disappointed. I listened attentively, and I was beginning to realize that when the church compromises the gospel to make Jesus Christ more popular, the world loses complete respect for the church. When a man can be awarded at BET Awards and also spiritually advising people on a Christian broadcast network, it creates confusion and people begin to ask some very deep questions. If a former security guard turned studio gangster, the rapper Rick Ross, has his own private jet, if the 45th US President Donald Trump has his own private jet, and if popular evangelical preachers also have their own multi-million-dollar private jets, what is the difference between the world and the church? I conducted a number of years ago a Bible study, and this non-Christian woman said that her mother would condemn pagan idolatry and people bowing to statues. But she and other Christians, talking about her mother, also bow to the exact same idolatrous images. And I was realizing that the world will not take you seriously if you are offering them something that they already have. But when I started university, this is where my challenges started to heat up. In the lectures, the French Revolution is presented to you as one of the major starting points in modern human liberties, where a European state revolted and made a complete rejection of God, where encyclopedic humanist thinkers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who taught the natural goodness of man, and Voltaire, the Jesuit-educated Freemason, who believed that society should get rid of the Bible, were both lionized and praised as great thinkers. You are also taught the rationalist German school of thinking, where Karl Marx on the left, Friedrich Nietzsche in the center, and Friedrich Hegel on the right are hailed as atheist intellectuals, when their ideas were only introduced to resolve the problems of Europeans. Their ideas can be traced to Aristotle, the Greek philosopher, for they all believed that blacks should have remained in servitude and that slavery was fully justified. I was also taught Freudism and Darwinism while studying media at university, men whose ideas were at odds with the Word of God. Today, men are closely scrutinizing these individuals' ideas, and they are realizing that there are many flaws in their theses, and they have not helped to resolve the problems in society worldwide, and they are far more destructive than enlightening. And these men's ideas is what led me even closer to the Lord, for I saw that they made situations worse in man instead of healing a broken world. And one man confirmed what I knew all along, and this is what he said. An atheistic communism, says Dr. Wiley, This new and destructive principle is the natural issue of the bondage in which the human mind has long so retained of the violence done to reason and faith. For superstition is the parent of atheism. The doctrine of Voltaire gave it an anarchy which baptized itself in blood. Pantheism spread all over northern Germany, and it is difficult to say whether it has been more fatal to Protestantism or to Romanism. Along the Rhine, if one may believe the published reports, there are millions of atheists. Still, rationalism has lost ground among the upper classes. This is the effect of French and German secular thought. So these pagan ideas have not resolved man's problems, but I want to share with you my next greatest challenge, Islam. When I was freshly converted to Jesus Christ, I would have many debates with Muslims, and I loved it, because unbeknown to them, they were strengthening my walk with God, and they made me search deeper into the Holy Scriptures. I never saw them as a threat. To me, they were just an Arabic brand of Roman Catholicism. For Catholics have their idolatrous relics and do pilgrimages. Muslims also do their pilgrimages to an idolatrous black rock in Mecca. Catholic nuns attire on their head covers from their top to their back, and Muslim women adorn themselves with the exact same headdress. Catholic cardinals wear the red skull cap on their head. Muslim men also wear the skull cap on their head. Catholics have their prayer beads with the crucifix, which they call the rosary. And Muslims have their prayer beads sometimes with the star in the crescent that they call a misbah. Now the Quran has two main historical errors. One of the surahs says that one of Noah's sons drowned in the flood. And another surah says that Jesus did not die on Calvary, but a likeness or someone else took his place. This heresy was adopted from the Gnostics. It did not originate with the Muslims. So Islam's main beef is with the divinity of Jesus, and they say the Holy Scriptures is corrupted and tainted. So let us address this issue, responding with Scripture. In Psalms chapter 12 and verse 6 and 7, Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 8, and Matthew chapter 24 and verse 35, God is very clear that he will always preserve his word. For how long? Forever. So when a Muslim makes an argument about God's words being corrupted, it is actually an attack against God himself. In Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 2 and Revelation chapter 22 verses 18 and 19, God is very clear that there are consequences for anybody who does try to tamper with God's word. So the Almighty is very clear about the preservation of the word of God. But let us focus on Jesus. In Hebrews chapter 2 verses 14 and 16, it is very clear that Jesus could not have the nature of angels while on earth, for it would have given him an advantage. So he took on him flesh and blood, so he could relate to us more. And 1 John chapter 4 and verse 2 says that anyone who says that Jesus came in the flesh, which is our fallen human nature, is of God. But verse 3 says that anyone who says that Jesus did not come in our fallen human nature is that spirit of Antichrist. Now, how did Jesus Christ describe himself? In Matthew chapter 18 and verse 11, Jesus said that he is the Son of Man, clearly showing his humanity. And John chapter 10 and verse 36, he calls himself the Son of God, which the people in his day, if you read the whole context of that chapter, they knew it meant that he is one and equal with God the Father, for he is both man and God at the same time. In John chapter 20 and verse 28, Thomas called him my Lord and my what? God. And God the Father in Hebrews chapter 1 and verse 8 also calls him God. These are two witnesses, one in heaven and one on earth. A number of Bible commentators confirm this also. The University of Oxford in England produced a solid intellectual, for this academic institution is still ranked as the top university on the earth. This man died as a martyr for sharing the word of God to an illiterate nation. There are monuments in England in his honour, and there are many phrases we still use today that were coined by him, such as fight the good fight. When we don't want to accept responsibility for another, we say, am I my brother's keeper? When we are struggling to make a decision, we say, the spirit is willing, for we want to do something but may not have the courage or strength to do it. And when we are describing those who are in power, we say the powers that be. Terms we use unconsciously, unaware that they are using scriptural terminology. The man who coined these phrases was literate in 6 to 8 languages fluently. And this is how William Tyndale, the English reformer, described Jesus. St. John saith, the thing which was from the beginning, and the everlasting life, that which was with the Father, he witnesseth that Christ is very God. The Word, or that thing, was made flesh, that is, became man. And thus we have in plain and open words a manifest article of our faith, that our Saviour Christ is very God and very man. The name of our advocate is Jesus, that is to say, a Saviour, said the angel to Joseph. He shall save his people, not in their sins, but from their sins. And this advocate and our Jesus, to save us from our sins, continueth ever, as it is written, and hath sempiterminum sacerdotium, an everlasting office, to make an atonement for sin. He took our nature upon him, and felt our infirmities and sicknesses. First, witness. Another man from the British Isles in the Scottish Highlands also confirmed what Tyndale and what the Holy Scriptures said, and this is what Alexander MacLeod said, quote, he is God, he is also man. He is our brother. He has a special interest in man. He has a fellow feeling of our infirmities. As God, he had a perfect knowledge of what we are, what we feel, and what we desire. But the mediator has a knowledge which, as God, he could not have possessed, and acquired an experimental knowledge of the human nature, and all of its sinless pains and infirmities. Astonishing thought. The Son of God learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15 and chapter 5 and verse 8. The one like unto the Son of Man is the mediator. He was made like unto his brethren. God sent forth his Son in the likeness of sinful flesh. The appointment given by God to his Son in our nature extended over all nations. Second, witness. Now, in a cemetery in central London dedicated to English radicals in England, there is buried a 17th century English Bible scholar by the name of John Owen. In his multi-volume set on the book of Hebrews, he understood Jesus' role as our high priest in heaven, and he said, quote, when and where he made reconciliation and atonement for us as for our sins, then and there he was a priest. The Lord Jesus Christ, while he was on the earth, made an atonement for us by his death. But to make atonement and reconciliation is the work of the priest, for the end of the priest's office was to make atonement or reconciliation. Third, witness. In a volume set titled The Family Expositor, 18th century scholar Philip Doddridge, continuing the school of thought, says, quote, from whence and in consequence of which design it behoved him to be made in all things like those whom he condescends to call his brethren, that so he might be a merciful high priest, in things relating to God, that he might in the most effectual manner make atonement for the sins of the people, which he could not have done if he had not assumed our nature. Fourth, witness. So 2 Chronicles chapter 29 verses 23 and 24 is clear that the priests were the ones who always makes the atonement. And Romans chapter 5 verses 10 and 11, Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 17, And 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 14 shows us that his death, resurrection, and his role as our high priest in our nature is central to the plan of salvation. So it was my debate with Muslims that made me study out these things even more. But there was one more group that strengthened my journey.
The white man that landed here, he came with two great weapons. One is the Bible and the other was the gun. If it didn't humble you with the Bible, it crumbled you with the gun.
You ever wonder how most of the Western world adopt a religion named Christianity? How did they get most of us and parts of the other continents to be Christians? When we find that in Asia, there's a lot of religion that flourish. In Africa, a lot of religion that flourish. But when the colonizers come, when the enslavers come, everybody is under one umbrella of Christianity. Big problem. Because we see that Christianity flourish because of violence. The sword and the gun is what made Christianity widely accepted.
This Jamaican-born, barefooted Rastafarian poet's birth name is Alan Hope, but he calls himself Muta Baruka, a Rwandan name that means one who was always victorious. His unoriginal argument is that black people who go to church, pray, study the Bible, and identify as a Christian is as a result of enforced European slavery and colonialism. Now, there is some truth to it, but let's approach it from another angle. When you read the Bible, the opening page says the first book of Moses. Is Moses a European name, an Asian name, or an African name? Something to think about. In the British Museum, there is a bust of a Near Eastern Babylonian Chaldean king from Asia, statues of Egyptian pharaohs from Northeast Africa, and a Roman soldier from the Mediterranean in Southern Europe. Now, in the books of Acts chapter 10 verses 1 to 3, in Daniel chapter 2 verses 28 and 29, and in Genesis chapter 41 verses 15 and 32, it is very clear that God gives visions and dreams about the future to Gentiles also throughout Afro-Eurasia. So color, race, or ethnicity is not an issue in the Holy Scriptures. But let us look at Musa Baruka's argument and slowly dismantle it. A 17th century Oxford-educated Anglican clergyman and missionary wrote a book in 1680 titled Negroes and Indians Advocate. And this is how Morgan Godwin described the indigenous people of the African continent. Quote, Negroes, natives of Africa, believed to be the descendants from Cham, of whom Cham or Ham directed his course to Africa. His posterity, the Negroes, they are sure, these keeping possession till this very day. In the Bible, Cham's grandchild Nimrod is represented as the world's first monarch, and Egypt or Mitzrayim is described as a place of learning. And then for the Abyssinians, that is modern Ethiopians, supposing them Cham's race, the empire, the most easterly part of all Ethiopia above Egypt, commanded many kingdoms and provinces. For David in Psalms we find does mention them twice, viz. Psalms 68 and verse 31 and in Psalms 87 and verse 4, amongst other names recited, the goodness of God's purpose of bringing all these several sorts of people into, where? The church. He then quotes Zephaniah chapter 3 and verse 10. Even from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, not improbably pointing at the very south of Africa, shall my suppliants bring mine offerings. There being no curse of Ham, that is, nor reparation of that force as to prevent their conversion, when heartily endeavoured or to make their services at the altar less acceptable to him. And the Holy Ghost especially commanding St. Philip to preach to the eunuch, a nobleman, as is supposed to the same country. The River Nile has been categorized as the second longest running river on the earth, and it has birthed some of the most highly sophisticated and technologically advanced cultures on the earth. The country we today call Ethiopia has a number of different tribes of people of all different shades and complexions, cultural traditions, and different forms of hair texture, with a very, very long Christian tradition, which is only now receiving popular attention. The people of the Sudan also come in different shades of brown, and their features do not change over time. When you look at the eyes of Sudanese people, they are just like their forebears that are on display in the British Museum. So we know that their features were not exaggerated in art. And some of them are my complexion, a kind of mid-brown, and others are like 11:59 p.m, 1 minute to midnight black. They are very, very dark-skinned. There are also biblical Coptic texts in the British Museum from the very, very little-known church in the Sudan. This history is very well hidden. How many people know that there were Christian kings and Christian queens in the Christian kingdoms of the Sudan? This is the history that Muta Baruka wasn't taught, because he has a colonial education, so he looks at the world from a Western perspective. How many people know about the ancient Christian churches in the Sudan? Very few do, because it is an episode of history that has been purposely overlooked and deleted so that blacks will always believe that Europeans civilized them. Recent archaeology has unearthed an ancient East African empire in Ethiopia, and they are realizing that they have to rewrite history. Why? Because some of the oldest churches have been discovered where? In Africa. Many modern engineers are analyzing the architectural genius of this Christian Ethiopian empire in Africa, and writers like Scotsman J.A. Wiley, Englishman Edward Gibbon, English Jesuit priest Philip Caraman, and German Orientalist Job Ludov all knew of the Ethiopian church's antiquity. And when the Reformation kicked off in Europe, where did Martin Luther look to find the oldest brand of Christianity at that time? To the Ethiopian church, where Martin Luther had an interview with Michael the Deacon of Ethiopia. This is a very rare manuscript that documents this dialogue. And when I purchased a book that documented this dialogue, the section of the dialogue between Luther and this Ethiopian had been deleted. And from a child to this very day, I would ask myself this very serious question. Why have Europeans gone to so much great lengths to delete black people out of the human story? That is also something to think about. So from a teenager to this very day, I would closely study post-slavery black movements that were birthed in the Americas. As 90 to 95% of the black people I grew up with in the church have left, many were drawn to the ideas of these men. But what were they going back to was the same paganism of all the other communities and ethnic groups. And they all seem to have this deep fascination with the serpent, the occult, voodoo, and obia. But some of the individuals who encouraged it were the so-called respected black intellectuals and their silly, erroneous claims. One of them is a woman who is the late Dr. Frances Cress Welsing. While she highlights the deep psychological damage of slavery, which is necessary, her solutions for healing in her book, titled The Isis Papers, is destructive, and it denies the fall at Eden and the rebellion that took place in heaven. Quote, "As a psychiatrist and behavior analyst," she says, "I was baptized in the Baptist Church and christened in the African Methodist Episcopal Church." She says to look to where? The Kabbalah, which literally means tradition, which is the Jewish mysticism, the tradition of things divine. In early Egyptian, that is African tradition, evil was associated not with Satan being kicked out of heaven, but Set, the brother of Osiris. Modern psychiatry should seek to discover if there is a united behavioral force field that can explain evil. That sounds like Star Wars, as well as other dominant behavioral phenomena. Evil is approached less often in natural sciences, including modern science. As sophisticated as the ancient Egyptians and other ancient cultures were in their architecture, they had a paganized animism and pantheistic belief, with a secret belief that was only for the priesthood. Albert Pike was a 19th century US Confederate States Army general, author, poet, orator, editor, lawyer, jurist, and sovereign Grand Commander of the Supreme Council of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. He was a staunch advocate of the Tree of Life teachings of the Kabbalah, saying it was identical with the teachings of Freemasonry. The late Edith Starr Miller said that the Kabbalah is one of the highest brands of the occult teaching, and Freemasonry is tied to the occult teachings of the Kabbalah, as modern studies have confirmed. And it was for a time a fad among popular celebrities, but within time it just phased out among other ideas. For all these other modern social sciences and man-made philosophies have not enlightened man more, and they are losing their once grip on modern thinking. You may wonder why. Very few people study these topics nowadays. I will explain to you why. They offer nothing and no solutions. Why? For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. And all man does is that he is ever learning, but he is never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Trying to replace God's word never works. And while men try to mock Jesus subtly by providing a dark cryptic alphabet community agenda, they are not really the greatest challenge. It is those who say they are of God. In the late 19th, early 20th century in North America, black immigrants from the Caribbean rejected the death, resurrection, and intercessory work of Christ and embraced Judaism. If you want a background on them, then read this book titled Chosen People: The Rise of Black Israelite Religions by Jacob S. Dorman. And the most popular of these groups have taken members from my church who have joined them. When you see them dressed like they are visiting Comic-Con for the Marvel comic franchise, then there are many red flags. They call themselves Israel United in Christ, and like westernized Christianity, they have racialized the plan of salvation. They heavily rely on Deuteronomic canonical texts. They are the Apocrypha and the Book of Maccabees. But what do these texts teach, and do they contradict the Bible? Well, let's see. In John chapter 5 and verse 39, Jesus instructs us to search the scriptures, for they offer us eternal life. And in Luke chapter 24 and verse 44, as we have shown, the law of Moses, the prophets, and the Psalms are the scriptures, or what we call the Old Testament. There is no mention of the Apocrypha and the books of Maccabees by Jesus Christ. Now in Psalms chapter 6 and verse 5, Isaiah chapter 38 and verse 18, Job chapter 7 verses 9 and 10, and Ecclesiastes chapter 9 verses 5 and 6, the Holy Scriptures that are consistent with each other, is very clear that the dead know absolutely nothing. When you are dead, you are dead. But what do these erroneous apocryphal texts say? The book of Baruch says, quote, O Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, hear now the prayer of the dead and of their children. And in the books of Maccabees it says, it is therefore a holy and wholesome thought to pray for the dead, that they might be loosed from sins. These uninspired books teach things that contradict the Holy Scriptures. And in the Roman Catholic Encyclopedia, volume 12, defending praying for the dead, it quotes from the book of Esdras. And it says, quote, Requiem masses are masses that are offered for the dead. They derive their name from the first word of the introit, which may be traced to where? The fourth book of Esdras, one of the Apocrypha. This is why I encourage people at all times to research everything. So as I bring this testimony to a close, I will show you the challenges I face with fellow blacks and how I deal with each one of them. In the year 603 BC, a Babylonian king had a dream where he saw an image in human form consisting of 4 different metals. He was later to discover that each metal represented a kingdom, and the last one, the 4th, will be replaced by a 5th and final kingdom that would last for how long? Forever. These kingdoms were all modeled after Nimrod, who was the first king that built cities to control people in a corrupt system, according to Genesis chapter 10 verses 8 to 12 and Genesis chapter 11 verses 1 to 9. Prophetic scholars in Western Europe from left to right, John Calvin, John Knox, Sir Isaac Newton, Matthew Henry, Thomas Newton and Dr. James Aitken Wiley all documented that this metallic image was a historic countdown of 4 succeeding empires from Babylon right down to the end of time. Now in the British Museum there is a section in a room dedicated to Iran in Western Asia, but there was something distinct about Iran like no other system. It had silver cups, silver incense burners, silver coins, silver gods and silver swords. Silver is a very rare metal to extract, but out of all the civilizations in the ancient world, Medo-Persia in modern-day Iran had an abundance of the metal silver. And this was the metal that she was symbolically represented as in 603 BC in Daniel chapter 2 verses 32 and 39. She was eventually succeeded by Greece in the Occident in Europe. And this mosaic painting in a museum in Italy shows the Medo-Persian monarch Darius III on the right and Alexander the Great of Macedonia, Greece on the left. And in the book of Daniel chapter 8 verses 5 and 21, Alexander the Great is symbolically described as that he-goat that came from the geographical location of where? The West. And the last powers on the earth will be located in the West and nowhere else. You see, the modern standards of beauty for the world is modeled after the West. Every textbook, course and exam you take is modeled after the West. And when we closely analyze how global trade works, the entire system is structured and modeled on the West. And this is how our modern world works. And you can research this for yourself. In this article titled How the European Union Exports Its Laws in London's Financial Times in 2007, it documents that everything is governed after EU trading laws. Rice farmers in India, mobile phone users in Bahrain, makers of cigarette lighters in China, accountants in Japan, software companies in California, and chemical producers in the USA. Most mobile phone customers around the world have to use the GSM EU standard. There are airlines, makeup brands, and car manufacturers that are governed after EU laws. When the company Microsoft wanted to purchase Blizzard, and when a new Apple iPhone is made, have you ever wondered why it had to have a USB? There is a reason. Microsoft needed EU approval to purchase it, and Apple had to put USB-C connectors in its iPhones to comply with EU rules. So it is very strange when people think that China from the East is going to rise up and overtake the West. Now, during the lockdown, China's Wuhan Institute was accused of spreading the COVID-19 virus. But who was funding the Wuhan institution? Well, the West. Now, I thought China was a threat. Interesting. China is the largest producer of cotton on the earth. But where does it get its machinery to harvest the cotton? From the tractor company John Deere. And John Deere is a US brand. If China is a threat, why again is the West supplying her with machinery? Interesting. And why are half of the US McDonald's chains doing in China to profit again from China? Her communist ideas came from the West, that is Karl Marx. Her one-child policy was also imported from the West at United Nations meetings. So we can clearly see that China is no threat. And that is why it is important to study prophecy carefully, for you can see the bigger picture. When the 44th US President Barack Hussein Obama was elected, I presented a talk in my home church to tell them that he is a part of a system that will eventually impose the mark of the beast on the whole of mankind. But to my shock and surprise, most of the church members were not really interested in hearing that. They were only focused on his race. And many of the church members were very upset with me and disappointed that I spoke out against their so-called long-lost black brother and savior. But they were naive to the fact that US presidents don't have no real power. Nearly all of the US presidents go to the same Ivy League colleges and are all related to each other. So America is dominated by a dynasty. It is not a democracy, neither a republic. So I'm going to share with you my spiritual position and why I have always been apolitical, never been patriotic nor nationalistic, and don't want a westernized European mindset nor a pan-African mindset, but I have a biblical world view. In 1 Timothy chapter 2 verses 1 and 2, we are instructed to pray not for Palestine and Jerusalem, but for kings and all that are in authority. In Matthew chapter 22 and verse 21, Jesus is very clear that we give what is due to God and what is due to Caesar. And in Revelation chapter 3 and verse 18, Jesus wants us to put on our spiritual spectacles so we can have a clear picture of what is going on in our world. Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12 gives us a reality check that we are also in a very deep spiritual warfare. We're up against principalities. And Revelation chapter 16 verses 13 and 14 says that these unclean spirits will be ever so zealously working behind the scenes to eventually unite the world into one global family to war against God and his people. So in Revelation chapter 14 verses 6, 7, 8 and 9, God is very clear that his bride, that is his church, not only have to preach the everlasting gospel that will give everlasting life to the world and restore fallen man back to the true worship of God, but God's people have to also warn the world of what's to come. For the two beasts or the two kingdoms in Revelation chapter 13 and verse 12 are pushing to unite the world into one global conglomerate. These two kingdoms have been identified as the papacy, also known as the Holy See, who is the older, and the United States, who is the younger, the second kingdom. And the United States' role on the prophetic timetable is to restore the power of the fourth kingdom, the papacy, in the book of Daniel. They are even modeled after Rome. In Washington, D.C., the US Senate is not only named and modeled after ancient Rome, but it is designed just like St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City in Rome. The Jefferson Memorial is also modeled after the Pantheon in ancient Rome. And this 16th century building in Italy, a residence of Pope Paul III, is called the Villa Vanessa, is designed in the shape of a pentagon. And what building in the United States is modeled after it? The headquarters of the Department of Defense that is nicknamed the Pentagon, who shapes and influences US foreign policy. So when President Obama visited Africa in the year he was elected, what was his overall aim? Was it to rekindle his father's African roots? Well, let's see. Africa is the second largest populated continent on the earth that makes up 20% of the planet's land mass, with 65% of the world's arable land and 10% of the planet's internal renewable freshwater source. It has 1/6 of the world's plant species, 1/4 of the world's mammal species, 1/5 of the world's bird species, and produces 1 billion tons of minerals worth $406 billion. It has 8% of the world's natural gas, 12% of the world's crude oil reserves, 88% of the world's diamonds, 40% of the world's gold, 38% of the world's uranium, 42% of the world's bauxite that produces aluminium. Mozambique produces the world's highest ruby reserves. And if you want to know how your digital devices work, 80% of the world's coltan is found in the Congo that makes your mobile phone vibrate. And the coast of Somalia has among the highest concentration of fish in the world's oceans. So why was Obama in Africa? It was not only to promote the alphabet community's agenda in Africa, which they totally rejected, but to expand the ever-growing economic corporate interests in Africa and to steal the natural resources of that continent under the disguise of AFRICOM, so that the US can build up air bases and expand its empire with the US drone programs on the African soil. So Obama was in Africa on business and nothing else on behalf of these greedy corporations, where for the past 500 years the Western world has not really given that continent a break. Black politicians like Obama and Kwasi Kwarteng in the UK are strategically placed with a method that the BBC calls the glass cliff. Now, the glass cliff is when a system is crumbling and about to fall, they put either a woman in position so that if the system fails, they can blame all women when it crumbles, or black people so they can blame the black race for the decline of their system if it crumbles under their watch. But despite this, I've had debates where there are blacks who still believe that their race is somehow miraculously going to rise up and restore their former kingdoms to its original state, for what it once was in the past. So I try to humbly school these blacks who are living in a delusion. For if both China and Islam from the East are subject to the West, why do blacks think that they are exempt? This is why it will never happen. I tell them who controls the popular black culture, who are the ones that shapes the music you listen to. It is managed by a few men that manipulate the art. Palestinian men like DJ Khaled profit from your culture, but how much do you gain? For every single music video looks exactly the same, with no real artistic creativity, and every artist's voice sounds like some AI computer generated mumble rap. And look at the material Generation X, Y and Z exports to the wider world. It is all toxic, where black people humiliate themselves to the public. Do you want to know why? Look at the most prominent black films that are promoted by big film distributors in the United States, in the favelas in Brazil, in the Caribbean and in the UK. The most popular films promote black people turning on each other, killing each other and having constant beef. Now, why is that, and who promotes this? Well, in a book that triggered the US Civil War titled Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe said in the 19th century, quote, "Sambo, Quimbo, these two colored men were the two principal men on the plantation. And how do you continue to run the plantation today? Simon Allegri had trained them in savageness and brutality, like these films promote, by playing off one against another." Interesting. Many blacks in the United States and in the UK complain that they do not get funding from the corporate world to start their businesses. This is because, as I keep telling them, they will only let you get far up to a point, but will not let you go even further. Think about it carefully. I tell them African immigrants in the United States have the highest number of degrees than any other group, but are paid far less than all the other ethnic groups. Can't they see how the system works? I had a conversation in a black shop where a man and a woman told me these coups in Africa is a sign that blacks are going to rise up again and the BRICS banks are going to challenge the West. I said, in modern history, who has ever been black people's allies? And none of these BRIC nations can't even get their act together. It is a blatant distraction. And who created the BRICS banks anyway? It was the West.
So this is the degree of Anglo-European American dominance. All the developing world is looking at the BRICS as their savior, and the BRICS is an acronym concocted by the chief economist of Goldman Sachs, right?
I tell these blacks, what has happened to anyone who has attempted to rebuild Africa or to restore the race? A declassified document from the Cold War was published. And under the COINTELPRO program, it read that they will destroy the rise of any black messiah. It read, prevent the rise of a messiah who could unify and electrify the militant black movement. And this April 2008 article in the London Guardian details who it targeted. Malcolm X's personal bodyguard was working as a double agent for the New York Police Department. He was killed by blacks with the government in the know. Martin Luther King's black photographer was working for the FBI, and the man who was standing over him when he was shot was a black CIA agent. Fred Hampton, the Chicago-based 21-year-old Black Panther's personal bodyguard, was working for the FBI, who gave them the details to his home where he was killed by the government. Walter Rodney, the Guyanese intellectual, was killed by his own race in 1980. Maurice Bishop, the Grenadian Prime Minister, was assassinated by his own race in 1983. Thomas Sankara, the president of Burkina Faso, was assassinated by his own race in 1987. Patrice Lumumba, the Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo, was killed by his own race in 1961. And in the same year, Prince Louis of Burundi was also assassinated by his own race, but always secretly behind the scenes with Western backing. And Amilcar of Guinea-Bissau was also assassinated by his own race in 1973. In other words, for those who think they're going to rise up and create a black economic system, you will be destroyed by your own race. Now, there is a reason that the West has gone to these lengths. It is because of one man. If you ever read this lengthy article, Black Moses Red Scare, in the Washington Post, it documents the names of black government agents who were appointed to infiltrate an organization that they saw as a major threat. They are Ernest J. Scott in the background, Captain James Wolverley Jones in the bottom left, and Major Walter Loving on the bottom right. The man who they appointed to spy on absolutely frightened the governments of the Western world, and he was closely surveillanced by J. Edgar Hoover in the United States and Winston Churchill in England. A telegram was sent to London's Foreign Office that is now preserved in London's National Archives, that is dated around the year 1924 to 1925. And this concerning telegram was sent from a British diplomat in Latin America to Sir Joseph Austin Chamberlain, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs. And this is what Major Charles Braithwaite Wallace said, quote, Marcus Garvey, the West Indian Negro who has the dreams and ambitions of founding a Negro empire in Africa, is a Jamaican who went to the United States, and he has succeeded in a great deal of money. He built a very large organization with over 900 divisions and a membership of approximately 500,000 membership in different parts of the world. The Universal Negro Improvement Association, which grew and expanded very rapidly. Garvey formed branches of the association in Philadelphia, Newport News, Norfolk, Cuba, Jamaica, Costa Rica, and Panama. He also started a steamship line, the Black Star Line, and his rapid success was due to good organization and extensive advertising. Remember, Garvey was a trained journalist who knew the power of the media. He said if this man could be enlisted on the side of authority or use his massive influence to continue British colonialism, if his racial prejudices could be removed, if he could be made to realize the greater benefits the empire has conferred on his race. Listen to what the British government said. His services might be made invaluable. The Right Honourable Marcus Mosiah Garvey attempted to create from scratch, with no Western corporate backing, an empire, a black economic new world order. His ideas weren't actually original, he was preceded by others. Afro-Indian Paul Coffey was already sending ships in the 1800s from America to Africa to send blacks back home. Benito Sylvain, the Haitian diplomat, also started a black universal movement, and West Indians like Jamaican-born John Brown Roswell and Dr. Edward Wilmot Blyden from the Danish West Indies, now US Virgin Islands, migrated to Africa from the West Indies to rebuild the continent. But Marcus Garvey wanted to take it to a whole new level with a brand new enterprise. He built a shipping company from scratch to transfer black intellectuals into Africa to rebuild the continent. It was a time, that is in the 1920s, where blacks felt a very deep sense of racial pride, where they were buying stocks and bonds to expand this movement. He was assisted by prominent blacks like Carter G. Woodson, who would write regularly in his journal, and there were blacks from Africa, South America, North America, Canada, the Caribbean and Europe who felt united in a global brotherhood with no tribal differences. It looked like a takeover, but it would not have worked. Not only did it not harmonize with the countdown of the prophetic charter, but Marcus Garvey attempted to single-handedly build an economic system in one generation, in contrast to what Europeans have developed collectively for the past 500 years. In this house in West London, Marcus Garvey died, and his dreams died with him. Deep down inside, he knew there was only one method to true inner peace and rebuilding any society, and this is what he said, quote, "Let the people know that God is not white, nor is he black." The greatest thing that Christ taught was love. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. In these statements are wrapped up the highest ideals of a Godhead, as in a relationship of a father with his son. There has been no greater philosophy in the history of mankind. So this is why I follow Jesus. He teaches us how to treat each other, and he also prepares us for the future. And Bible prophecy has always been to steer God's people in the right direction to eternity. So this is my personal testimony, to let both the church and the world know that no matter how much evil, hypocrisy, and nastiness you witness and see in the church, I have always kept my eyes not on man, but on Jesus, even with my flaws, failings, and daily struggles. And I will challenge you, try and get to know who Jesus is for yourself, and you will realize, as you've seen in this study, that no ideology or idea can match up to what Jesus has to offer.
So this is why I did a testimony. I wanted to show people exactly why I do Even at the Doors. It's not only to encourage myself, but it's to encourage you guys also. And I've realized we do live in a world, unfortunately, where most people are followers. And that is why I always encourage you to research every single thing for yourself. So I really pray that this study was an encouragement to yourself to see what is really going on in this world. And I really pray that each one of you can make a conscious decision to accept Jesus Christ. God bless.